everybody can hear me and see me, and that everybody has been given access to this webinar. It's wonderful to be here with you, and I'm going to be talking to you about the why, how, and what of ICT. Just before I start with the actual presentation, I just want to remind everybody that I'll be talking for about 45 minutes, 40 to 45 minutes. And then after that, you will have 15 minutes in which to ask questions or to hear me answer the questions that you might already have posed. You can post questions by going to the right side of the screen, and there you'll see a small box for the questions, for you to post the questions that you might have. So please feel free, ask me any questions that you like. Questions related to the presentation would be very nice. I do realize that my head is shining a little bit, so please don't ask me any questions about why I couldn't organize the lights better so that I don't have a shiny head. I hope that you'll find this webinar to be interesting and informative. I'd just like to thank Macmillan Education and Mondadori for Education for inviting me to this, giving me this opportunity. They're both wonderful organizations, and I would encourage you to go to the websites and get more information about their services. The video of this will be downloadable tomorrow morning, I've been told, and there will be a PDF of the presentation. If you're wondering why I keep looking over here, it's because I have my notes there. So I'm talking about ICT, and I have notes on a piece of paper. Yes, I know this is a bit of a contradiction, but hey, we do it in different ways so that we can make sure that we have backups. Backups are very important. The final thing I'll say before I start is, if you're worried about certificates, then there will be certificates sent out automatically to you on having attended this presentation. The certificates will probably be sent within a week, right? So if a week after this you still haven't received your certificate, then I would get in touch. But please don't get in touch immediately tomorrow saying, where is my certificate? Okay, so I've said thank you to everybody. I hope made you aware of who is helping with this. Mondadori Education and Macmillan Education. Thanks again to both of those. And I'll now turn over and start the presentation, and I hope that this goes to... Yep. Okay, so we're now sharing the presentation with you. So I've told you what the title is. What I wanted to start with is just this quote from Dylan Williams, and rather than me talk over the top of it, making it more difficult for you to read, I'll just shut up for 1 minute, which will probably be nice for you. So one of the reasons that I chose this quote from Dylan Williams is because I'm going to be using quite a few models in this presentation. And one of the purposes of this presentation is to get you to think in different ways about ICT. But sometimes when you're listening to me talk about the models, you might think, well, this is a very simplistic representation of how things are. And I will acknowledge that many of the models that I use are very simple. But for me, and I was very pleased when I read Dylan Williams talk about this, for me, a simple model is very powerful because it communicates very quickly, very easily, the point that you're trying to make, right? Well, I could make them more complex. I could add in more factors and more features. but I think very often you need to get the point across as quickly as possible. So the main model that I'm going to be using in this presentation is this model of why, how, and what. To this slide, I've added the idea of will, right? Both in terms of will I or won't I, which is related to motivation, which I'll come back to in a minute, but also will in terms of, do I have the willpower? Do I have the determination to do this, which in some ways is related to motivation, but willpower, I feel, is also related to other factors, and I'll come back to this as we go through. Now, this is not my model. If you have any questions about anything as we go through, then you can email me at tony@nile-elt.com. Nile is a teacher training organization which has partnered with Macmillan. I used to work at the University of East Anglia. I was a program manager of Presessional and Insessional courses, which meant that I was preparing students for study at the university. But now I'm working full-time for Nile. I was working as a consultant, but now I'm working full-time for Nile, have been for the last 3 years, as an academic director. And we are mainly involved in teacher training, teachers from all over the world. We do consultancy projects, going out to work with teachers, but also having teachers come here to Nile on our courses during the summer and all year round if you have a closed group of teachers. So if you're interested in that, I would recommend that you go to nile-elt.com, right? But as I said before, I just introduced myself, this is not my model. None of the models that I'm using are my models. They are, in some cases, adaptations of other people's models. But one of the principal models that I'm going to be using is this idea of why, how, what. And there's a very nice talk from a gentleman called Simon Sinek on TED.com. The first 3 to 4 minutes really encapsulate the idea that he's talking about. And as you will see from this slide, as of a couple of days ago, he'd had about 34 million views of that talk, which gives you an indication of how useful people have found it. Now, the basic idea of this is that very often what happens when we are thinking about education, or when we're thinking about starting a company, or when we're thinking about many things, we start with the what. Right? So companies start with what in terms of what they're going to produce. Teachers start with what in terms of what areas are they going to cover, what syllabus features are they going to look at, what language are they going to teach, what skills are they going to teach, and then they think in terms of how am I going to do that? What activities will I use? How will I teach that point? How will the students learn that point? And they might then think of, why am I doing this particular thing? But they very often don't explain that why to the students. And one of the main points that Simon Sinek makes is that this method, this route from what to how to why, is really the wrong way around. That instead of working from what to how to why, we should be starting with why. And I've used this with teachers a lot in talking about their teaching, but increasingly in the last year or 2 years, I've used this much more as well in terms of ICT. So what I try to get people to start by doing is not thinking about what ICT are we going to use, what apps, what hardware, what software, then how are we going to use it, but instead work from the why out to the what. Right? So starting with Why are we using ICT? Why are we thinking of using Google Docs? Why are we thinking of using Google Classrooms? Why are we being encouraged to use this new interactive whiteboard? Why are we using PowerPoint? Right? Starting with the why. Now, one of the reasons that I think that this is so important is in terms of motivation. Right? One of the reasons for starting with why is because of motivation. And this model, again, comes from somebody else, in this case, a gentleman called Jeff Petty. And if you go to his website, jeffpetty.com, you'll find a whole host of resources there. He's a fantastic trainer, writer. He wrote a book called Evidence-Based Teaching. And provides a lot of resources in relation to that. But his model of motivation is, again, very simple and I think very powerful. That he would claim that motivation is the student expectation of success times the value of the goal. Right? Now, to me, that multiplication is very important there. It's saying that the value of the goal multiplies the expectation of success. So it has a significant impact on how much students expect to succeed and then on how motivated they are. Now, the relation of this to the how, what, and why, or what, how, and why, to put it in the correct order, is that expectation of success is created by what we teach and by how we teach it. So just to go back to the what, if you say to a student, today we are going to be looking at the first conditional or mixed conditionals, then some students will look at you as if to say, what? What's that? I don't understand that. Some students will be baffled by the terminology. Some students will be put off by the fact that it's grammar. Some students will turn off because they don't see the point in it, even if you do a number of useful exercises showing how useful it can be. Right? Or even if you do exercises that break it down very simply to help them go through this, right? So the how and the what is important to the student's expectation of success. What you choose to teach, how you present it is very important to that expectation. But the point I would make is that the value of the goal comes from explaining the why. Right? That if the student doesn't understand or hasn't had the why explained to them, then the value of the goal is not clear. Right? They don't understand why they are learning this thing, and they don't understand the goal of learning it and the importance of that goal to them. They don't see it. And so if that happens, then you have no multiplication effect. So all of the work that you have then put in getting them to expect success is squandered, because you are not multiplying it by making use of this value of the goal. And I don't know about you, but certainly in terms of my own learning, this was very true, that very often I wouldn't study as hard as I possibly should have, or definitely as hard as I could have, because I didn't see the value of that goal. I didn't understand why it was important to me immediately, why it was important to me later on, right? Now, one of the reasons that I'm emphasizing this is because before we started this webinar, and I'll just come back to talking to you directly, right? One of the reasons is because before we started this webinar, I had a question in the Google Docs, and that question was, what do we do in terms of ICT? How can we get ICT to work when we have lazy students, right? And for me, this idea of laziness of students, or that students are not interested, often comes back to that combination of expectation of success and value of the goal, right? And that if you have students who are not engaging as much as they could have, very often I think it's because you haven't clearly identified for them the why this is important to them immediately, or in later terms, later on in their life, later on in their education, etc. Alternatively, it might be that you haven't broken it down, the activity, broken it down in terms of the how they do it, to make them feel that they can expect success. And I know that's very difficult for teachers to do because they have many different students in the class, but I'm saying that often the reason for them being lazy or feeling unmotivated is because they don't have that expectation of success. Sometimes the expectation of success can come simply from the teacher working with them in a way that shows them that they expect that student to succeed. It's what sometimes in research into education has been called the Pygmalion effect. Pygmalion because Pygmalion was the character who was mentored by a person to become somebody else, and there was the belief that she was able to become somebody else, and that in large part was what helped her then to achieve that transformation, right? So, okay, I'm emphasizing this again because I want you to, if you have any questions, to feel free to post them, and I'm trying to answer some of the ones that I saw before we started this. All right, so going back to the presentation, right? So back. Okay, so to move on. So to give you an example of this, right? Sometimes when we are looking at ICT, we will start with the what, right? We'll start with what resources do we have in terms of what devices do we have, what resources are there online, what processes can we use for research, possibly for creation, and this is a way of looking at it. And we might then think in terms of, okay, so what online courses do we have? What online tools do we have? What online reference can we use? What courses might there be available on devices, right? And how can we use them, or what processes can we use to help students to collaborate in terms of ICT, to help students to plan using ICT, to help students to revise using ICT. And then we might look at courses like MOOCs from places like FutureLearn or edX or Udacity. We might look at references like Wikipedia or Google Search. We might look at tools like Google Docs, right? All of this is considering the what first. And when I talk to teachers and to administrators and to principals, very often they are starting from this point. They are starting from, oh, I've heard of Google Docs. What do you think of it? Should we use it? Oh, my students use Google Search. What do you think? Is it a good method if they use Google Search? And they're looking in terms of what can they use in terms of ICT to make their students more effective, and then in terms of how can they use it, in terms of possibly using that tool right? So Google search in terms of how they use it for reference, how they might use it online to collect, to research, and how they might use it effectively, right? So they might be looking at how you use key terms to specify what search results you want, right? Or how you might use find in a web browser to go through and search through that document to see if it has the key terms that you're looking for, right? And then decide how to collect that information and use it in your research, right? Alternatively, they might be thinking of using Google Docs. Many teachers now talk to me about their school deciding that they're going to be using Google Docs, and the question then is, how do we use it to help students to create things, or how do we use it to help students to collaborate with each other, right? How do they use it as a tool online? How do they use it for collaboration to put things together, right? Now, my point in this is that what we've effectively done is we've gone from what, we've identified what we want to look at. So it might be Google search, it might be Google Docs, it might be using dictionaries or Wikipedia. And then we've thought of how, and we've kind of crammed the how into the what, right? And by cramming the how into the what, we've made it take up less space, both in terms of what we're thinking of and the time that we have to consider how. And the why has gone completely. There's no space in this for the why. There's no space for us to think about why are we doing this, right? And the why can have so many different answers, right? We might be doing it to improve performance. We might be doing it to facilitate learning, to make learning easier, right? And because we haven't thought about the why, very often we are faced with the why not, right? So because we haven't communicated clearly why we have chosen to do these things, why we have chosen to use these tools, the answer that teachers come to us with is, well, no. And sometimes it's because of fear, and sometimes it's because of a lack. The lack might be a lack of experience, or a lack of skills, or simply a lack of interest, right? If you say, we have decided that we need to start using Google Docs, well, maybe for many teachers, Google Docs is something that they've rarely heard of, or they're looking at it and thinking, well, we've used Word. Why do we need to use Google Docs? What is it going to add? And they think of it in terms of not what can it allow me to do more, because they don't have that knowledge perhaps, but they're thinking it in terms of their fear of failure, their fear of losing status, their fear of wasting time, because they're going to spend all this time learning to do something new that they're not convinced is going to be useful, right? So this last year in 2017, we had 3 groups of Italian teachers and principals come to Nile, and we worked with them about using ICT, right? And part of the thing that we did, sorry, I'll come back. Sharing, right? I'll come back. Right. So part of the thing that we did with them was to take them to a local school or local schools. And when we were showing them around, we were showing them examples of ICT that was used in the schools. But one of the most important things that we did was get them to have a conversation with the principal, with the one of the head teachers, with the IT person there about how they had implemented ICT in the school and with the teachers, right? And one of the main answers that those people had about the success of the ICT and the adoption of the ICT that the Italian teachers had seen in the classrooms was getting what we call buy-in from the teachers. That the teachers first had to agree that what they were doing was important to the students and would have an impact on the education. That the why they were going to be doing this thing was clearly established, first of all, and that the teachers bought into this, that the teachers collectively decided that this was a useful use of time, and that this was something that if they spent time learning how to use it, what it did, then it would have an impact on their teaching, right, and on the students' learning. Okay, so for me, identifying within a school, within a group of teachers, why you are doing these things is one of the key drivers to successful implementation of ICT. In addition to why being so important when you're talking to students about use of ICT, about what you're doing in the classroom, right? Okay, so going back to, so moving on from this, right? Moving on from the why not. Right? So I'm just going to move quickly through this because I'm realizing running short of time. So here are a number of different whys that we could choose as teachers, as an institution, as a principal, as an IT or ICT promoter, right? We might decide that we are using ICT or apps or whatever you want to call it in order to save money, right? We might decide that one of the main reasons that we're doing it is in order to reduce the amount of paper that we're using and thereby save money. I think if you make that case and you don't show how that saving of money is then going to have an impact on student learning and teacher effectiveness, you're going to have a hard time, right? But I think some of these whys here would be readily accepted by teachers as useful or worthwhile aims, and if you can persuade them that this use of ICT is going to have an effect, then I think they would buy in, and then I think they would spend the time learning how to use this ICT, right? So to give you an example, we might say that we're using ICT to enhance understanding, right? We might say this to teachers, we might say this to students, right? Or we might say this to ourselves, that this is my aim. What I want to do is to think about how I'm going to use ICT to enhance the understanding of my students, right? And then we might think, okay, so enhancing understanding can be done in a number of different ways. I can enhance understanding by providing the input in a variety of different ways, or by providing a variety of different kinds of input, right? I can enhance understanding by recycling or revisiting the content. One of the crucial books for me reading in the last 12 months to 18 months is called The Secret Lives of Learners by Graham Nuttall. And in that, he demonstrates through research that he carried out over a period of years into the learning of primary school students, that students need to revisit the intended learning outcome or the point of the lesson a minimum of 3 times in 3 different forms for that input to become intake, for what the teacher is talking about to become something that has changed their long-term memory. That it's not just something that they've been thinking about, it's not just something that they have been doing activities with, but it's become something that they understand and are able to use. And so we might enhance understanding by checking their understanding at each of those stages. So Dylan Williams, who I introduced this, who I used a quote to introduce this presentation, talks about assessment for learning, not assessment of learning, or in addition to assessment of learning. And when we are assessing for learning, what we are trying to do is to establish how much the students have understood from what we have done in order to determine what we do next, right? Because very often students don't understand or not understand. It's a partial understanding, and we have to establish how much and what they have understood before we move on, because we risk losing them. So we might check the understanding in class, we might check it online, we might revisit the content online or on a device, we might provide a variety of input through video or through experts. The experts, as I showed you earlier, could be through TED Talks, could be through iTunes, right? There are iTunes, Apple courses that they have with a variety of universities, or through YouTube education channels, right? They could do it through online, through Moodle or through Padlet, which is something that I'm going to show you at the very end of this presentation. They could do it online through Camtasia. Right? Camtasia is what's called a screencast software. So it allows you to capture the screen as you are presenting something or as you are moving through it, and then it produces it as a video. So that means that if you do a presentation, you can use Camtasia to capture it, then you can send it to the students, and the students can then revise or revisit it. It's something that the University of East Anglia was being used more and more by the professors, by the tutors, to capture their teaching and then allow students to come back to it at a later stage. On the devices, an example of a simplified form of Camtasia is an application called Explain Everything. And what Explain Everything allows you to do is again, capture the screen of the device and then to use that device through annotation, through audio, to explain something that you have gone over, right? So I use Explain Everything very often. When I've done a lesson, I will capture the board that I've used, the whiteboard that I've used, and then I will either send that to my students and ask them to explain what I did on the board, or I will create a short video myself to explain again what I did on that board, right? Because very often students pay attention to the board, but they don't take notes. They don't revise, revisit that content that I've explained. And I want some way for them to go over that. But notice that I am working from the center out. I'm not starting with Explain Everything or Camtasia. I'm starting with, my purpose is to enhance understanding. I'm going to do this by recycling and revisiting. I can do this online or on a device. And on a device, I can use Explain Everything to revise, to revisit, to enhance understanding. So I'm working from the inside out, from the why to the how to the what. Right? Checking understanding, again, I could use something like Google Forms. Google Forms has a variety of ways that you can use it to give students questions, multiple choice questions or open questions, and then have them submit it, and then you can either get it to self-mark through providing the right options, or mark it yourself as you would with any kind of class submission, right? You can check understanding in the class through applications like Poll Anywhere, which allows students to log on to a site or to a page, and within that page or that site, they can then ask questions, or you can ask questions of them, and they can show you how many people can provide the right answer to the question that you're asking, right? So this can enhance understanding. It can also empower students, right? So you might see this as enhancing understanding, or as making students more autonomous, more critical thinkers, right? Again, I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to provide you with one alternative to this framework, one model, right? So sometimes when I'm talking about the why of using ICT, teachers will ask me about, well, what about critical thinking? What about how do I develop critical thinking? And one of the models that I go back to is Bloom's taxonomy, right? So Bloom's taxonomy, when it's traditionally presented, is a pyramid. And it starts at the bottom with remember that students, the first step that they have to take in understanding something or in learning something is to remember what they already know, or to remember what they've been told, right? And then they or they demonstrate understanding of that thing, and then they seek to apply it, then they seek to analyze it, to evaluate it, and to create it, right? And the remember, understand, apply are typically seen as or called the LOTS, the lower order thinking skills, and the analyze, evaluate, create are seen as the HOTS, the higher order thinking skills. Now, my experience at the university has shown me that it's an artificial distinction to make between LOTS and HOTS. That very often you can do very higher order things with what are traditionally seen as lower order items. So for instance, a definition within a university setting can be very complex. A definition can compare two sources, or it can have a number of different parts, or it can say, well, in this context, this definition is appropriate, but in this context, this definition is better, and in this context, this definition is better, and in this situation, we're going to take this definition, right? So that's one of the reasons why I've put this together as a wheel, not as a pyramid, because I think that the items link together in more complex ways. But one of the reasons that I'm using this is because teachers commonly say to me that one of the priorities that their education system has set is to develop critical learners, or to develop learners who have autonomy, or to develop creativity, right? And using Bloom's taxonomy is a very clear way of developing a process for critical thinking. But one of the reasons that I recommend using it for ICT is because there are a number of resources, and one of the best ones that I know is Kathy Schrock, Buyin Apps. So if you type Buyin Apps into your search engine of choice, you will then come across this as an example. Kathy does this for iPads, for Android devices, for online resources, and for Google Classroom resources. And what she's done is she's recommended different apps at different levels, right, for different purposes. So if you want to help students to remember, then you would use an app like Quizlet, right? If you want to help students to analyze, then you might use an app like Padlet. So Padlet is the one in the center here that says organizing. Quizlet is the one that says recalling. So Quizlet, for example, is a digital flashcard, and it allows you to set up packs of words that students are going to learn. In this case, it's prepositions. And on one side of the flashcard, they have the word, and on the other side, they have a picture. So they would test themselves with the picture and then try to remember the word. The nice thing, or one of the nice things about Quizlet is that it allows them to test themselves in a number of different ways. So in some cases, they would be asked to write the word. In other cases, they would be given the word, they would hear the word, and they would be asked to spell it. They might also be asked to match the picture to the word. So there are a variety of different ways in which they can do this. And again, for me, this comes back to expectation of success, because there are so many different ways in which they can test themselves, in which they can build this learning, right? So this is for me, this is an alternative way of thinking about the why. If I have a very clear why, either from my principal or from my syllabus or from my bless me, or from my educational authority, that I need to develop critical thinking, that's fine. But then I think about what I am going to use in terms of my why, right? Why am I using ICT? I'm using ICT to develop critical thinking. What part of critical thinking am I going to develop? Well, I'm going to look at remembering, okay? In remembering, which of these apps am I going to use? Do I use Quizlet? Do I use Show Me, which is a similar app to explain everything, right? But I'm starting with that why. Now, I realize that I've gone through this very, very, very quickly. So what I wanted to leave you with is a Padlet that I have created, right? And you can access that Padlet through this web address, right? And when you access the Padlet, you will see that I have curated the recommendations that I've made in terms of the original video that I showed you of Simon Sinek. And then I've recommended some other applications that you can click on and explore, as well as video resources and resource recommendations, right? So my idea here is that I'm providing you with some applications to look at, but this is in terms of that final why that we were exploring, the why of developing critical thinking, breaking critical thinking down into particular parts, remembering, understanding, analyzing, evaluating, and then deciding which of these apps we were going to focus on to help with that part. So, for instance, Quizlet is helping them to remember, Kahoot is helping them to understand, explain everything could be helping them to, again, understand or analyze or even evaluate and create, right? And Edpuzzle, similarly, Edpuzzle is creating interactive videos, and what Edpuzzle could be used to do is to help them to explain or to create an explanation of their own, which evaluates and analyzes, right? So I'm leaving you with this as a kind of extension activity that you can look at later. And again, as I said at the beginning, you've got my email address. So if you have any questions related to this, then I'd be more than happy to respond to those. Okay, so that's 45 minutes of me presenting the why, how, and the what. Now, what I'm just going to do, just give me 2 seconds, is I'm just going to look at these questions that you've posted, and if you want to post more questions, then you can. Okay, so I'm back. So one of the questions that I answered at the beginning was about the laziness of students. And just to remind you, my argument would be that if we see students who are lazy, then very often that laziness is related to motivation. And the motivation is related to, again, the what, the how, the why. And the argument that I would present is that very often the laziness is either because the why hasn't been explained, or because the how and the what hasn't been thought about clearly enough to generate an expectation of success. And that if you are using ICT, you have to be using it in a way that starts with, why are we using ICT? And then to be able to explain to the students, okay, this is what we're doing, but this is how we're doing it. And this is why we're doing it in this way. And this is why we have chosen to do this. And this is why we have chosen to use this ICT. And I would argue that then you're much more likely to get them on board and much more likely to have them engage with the activities and with using the ICT, right? Another question that I've been asked is, what issues are there with how teachers use ICT? Well, I think that one of the main issues is that, coming back to what I talked about in terms of why not, right? That often teachers are either fearful or lacking, right? And that often they're lacking in understanding why they're using this. And so they might be using it in the wrong way, or they might be using it very superficially because the why hasn't been clearly explained, or because the how hasn't been given enough time, right? So the how they use it, they haven't received enough training, they haven't received enough explanation. And very often what I see is that because people start with the what, they pick too many things. They focus on, say, 5, 10 new things that they're going to use. And they try to learn, or they try to have teachers learn how to use those 5 or 10 new things. And what ends up happening is that nothing gets learned effectively. Right? So what I would much prefer people to do is to say, okay, this is why we are using ICT. We're using it to enhance understanding. Right? Now, we can enhance understanding by revising or revisiting. Right? Let's focus on that. We're going to focus on revising and revisiting. Okay? What can we now use to help us to revise and revisit? Maybe it's Camtasia. Maybe we believe that by creating videos of a PowerPoint, we can help students to revisit, recycle, reflect on that idea. And then that will help them to develop a deeper understanding. But I presented a number of different things that you could use to enhance understanding. I'm not suggesting, please, I'm not suggesting that you then explore all of those different methods. I would suggest why, then decide how you're going to do that, and then decide 1 or maybe 2 applications or resources that you could use to do that, and explore those and help teachers to understand why you're using those things and how they can use them effectively, right? So one of the questions that I had at the end was, what is the meaning of Camtasia? So to repeat again, Camtasia is what's called a screen capture tool. And what that allows you to do is to capture the screen of your computer, right? And to see everything that is happening on your computer. So if you are using a PowerPoint, it will capture the animation of your PowerPoint. And then at the end, when you stop the Camtasia, it will produce a recording of that PowerPoint, with you talking over it if you have been talking during that PowerPoint. Right? And then you can send that to the students, and the students can then revisit it. Now, one of the things that I've been asked to say is that next week, that on the 22nd of March, not next week, you will have another speaker called Dave Spencer, and he will be talking about flipped classrooms. Right? Now, Camtasia is seen by many as one powerful tool for flipping the classroom, right? In that you can then produce videos that students can look at before the class, so that when they come in, they have knowledge, they are able to remember things that they have heard, right? And you can then develop their understanding in class, spending the time with you explaining or clarifying, or with them working together to explore, right, or to practice, rather than you spending time in the class explaining everything, right? So Camtasia is an example of a tool that can be used to enhance understanding, and how you are enhancing understanding is by using the flipped classroom method, by presenting the information before that can then be developed inside the classroom, right? So there's another question that I'm looking at, and it's ironic because people are asking this, and I said that very often when I'm talking to people about ICT, one of the first questions they ask me is, Tony, what is the best tool? Or Tony, what do you think of Google Docs? What do you think of Explain Everything? What do you think of Camtasia? My answer would be, for what? Why are you using this? I'll get closer to the screen. Why are you using this? Right? No tool is good if you don't have a clear reason for using it. Right? You can produce wonderful videos with Camtasia. You can produce wonderful resources with Microsoft Word. But if you don't have a clear reason for doing that, then what you are doing becomes unclear. How you are doing it is unclear. And the student expectation of success falls, and the student's value of the goal vanishes. And the tool becomes devalued. And very often, what is happening is that the teachers are resisting the tools, not because they're bad tools, but just because they have been devalued because the why hasn't been explained or explored adequately enough, right? Related to what I've been talking about, people are asking about things like open education resources, right? So an open education resource is one that can be used without needing of copyright, or without, you can use it freely. It's in some ways it's related to the idea of copy left rather than copyright. That copy left is the idea that the producer of the resource stipulates the terms in which that resource can be used, right? And so they say, for instance, this resource can be used, but you must give attribution. No money, but attribution. And attribution means you must say where it came from, right? Now, I think that open education is a fantastic movement. I think the movement towards making research open is a fantastic idea, right? But again, one of the the critical things that I think you need to identify is, why am I using this resource? What is my aim? Right? Now, many teachers, when I talk about this, it's not so much that they resist, but the argument that they make is, well, our syllabus stipulates what we need to cover and when we need to cover it, right? Or our syllabus and our curriculum tells us what we are doing. And we have a limited choice about how we do it, right? And because the syllabus stipulates the what, and to some extent the how, there's very little reason to think about the why, because we have no choice. We don't have a choice about why we are doing it, right? But what I would suggest is that much of the time that is wasted and much of the frustration, both for students and for teachers, is feeling that the goal of their work as a student or as a teacher is not as productive as it can be, and not as worthwhile as it can be. And I think that that value and that goal, sorry, that value comes from clearly articulating what the value of the goal is. Why are we doing this? Why are we using this software? Why are we using this resource, right? And to me, it's ironic that we are often so focused on critical thinking, and yet in terms of what we are doing and how we are doing it, there is so little articulation of why it is important or why we have chosen to do that. And the fundamental thing that I would ask you to do when you are thinking about ICT, or when you're thinking about software, hardware, resources, right? When you're thinking about teaching, is simply to give yourself enough time to articulate to yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I teaching this thing? Why am I teaching it in this way? Why do my students need to be able to do this? Why am I spending my time, my valuable time, my creativity doing this thing? And if you can articulate that, your motivation will increase, your students' motivation will increase, your productivity will increase. That's my argument, that's my belief, that's my experience. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me talk about this. Thank you to Mondadori Education. Thank you to Macmillan Education. As I said, if you want the video of this presentation, it will be available at www.mondadorieducation.it. A PDF of the presentation will be available to download tomorrow, 22nd of March, for Dave Spencer and the Flipped Classroom. Thank you all for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions, if you have anything you would like to ask me, please get in touch at tony@nile-elt.com. Thank you very much.